I have looked more and more like a kind of hacker in some kind of Netflix series, which I can assure you my life is much more boring.
Hi guys, today we're going to talk about, I guess, the most common way to get into cyber risk research, and that is writing your Bachelor or Master thesis about a cyber risk or cyber risk quantification related topic. Now, I'm very happy to introduce today's guest on the program because he is, I guess, one of the most efficient and one of the most promising young researchers in the cyber risk area. Currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Innsbruck, has done his PhD already at the University of Oxford about the economics of cyber risk transfer. So please welcome to the program Dr. Daniel Woods.
Hi guys, nice to meet everyone, I guess, virtually.
So how did you start your career in cyber risk insurance?
Yeah, so I started a PhD in cybersecurity in the UK, and a strange thing about how this PhD began was there wasn't a clear topic for me. So I had done an undergraduate and master's degree in pure mathematics, so a lot of kind of algebra and number theory. And I wanted a topic that was both quantitative, but also pulled in some of the more interesting aspects of cybersecurity, because it's kind of this topic that goes from low-level compilers all the way up to you see, world leaders talking about cybersecurity. And I think throughout my research so far, I've touched on various of those aspects, all through the lens of cyber insurance. So for me, it's this kind of topic that captures the many different aspects of cyber risk and cybersecurity.
I think it is for many students very challenging. So even if you're at a big university around the globe that, for example, has an insurance department, very likely there won't be that many people doing cyber insurance, cyber risk research. And this is, of course, just the insurance angle on the topic. There's also pure cybersecurity, informatics. So today we want to help you guys out there who are doing their bachelor's or master's degree, or maybe even just looking for a seminal paper, and showing you what topics are out there and what the literature in that field says. To not only show you the areas where you can write a thesis, we're also gonna rate each topic on 4 different benchmarks. Now, the first 2 are how suited they are, how feasible they are for a bachelor or respectively master thesis. And then the 3rd and 4th benchmark that we use are how interesting the thesis topic is on the one hand for academia and on the other hand for the industry itself. Now, the other big premise is, of course, the most important thing when doing a bachelor-master's degree, even more important than having an interesting topic, is to finish your degree. You should first look at if these topics are doable, and then in the second step see which of them have the most relevance for academia or for the industry. And as a last thought, if you choose to write about cyber risk quantification, cyber risk insurance, whatever topic that's even somewhat related to today's list, please also let us know. We really want to see what comes out of these topics, maybe even out of this list. This is on the one hand, of course, the general principle of academia, but specifically in cyber risk research, it is so important to get everybody together. And this not only includes students, but also the various stakeholders in the cyber risk ecosystem. The first topic that we have is the insurability of cyber risk itself. Now, this is basically one of the oldest and even the evergreenest of all the topics in the academic cyber risk literature. On the one hand, the question itself, are cyber risks insurable, is, given that we have a market now that has premiums of, depending on your sources, between 5 and 8 billion, is kind of redundant. There are, of course, many, let's say, sub-questions which are still very relevant. So Daniel, you have also done research on this topic. What do you think in terms of feasibility?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it depends on scope. So as you say, cyber risk is a broad topic. There are many kinds of cyber incidents, from ransomware to business email compromise, to data breaches, to business interruptions. I think it becomes a more tractable question if you focus on a subset of incidents. And then if you're interested in doing an empirical analysis, the next question becomes, how do you get data on that? For some of those incidents, like data breach, there are institutions like Privacy Rights Clearinghouse who are collecting a lot of information and it's publicly available. For others, like ransomware, because it's in this kind of gray area where perhaps paying ransoms is illegal, perhaps it isn't, it's actually very difficult to get a set of losses that you could begin to ask the question, is this insurable or is it not? In terms of feasibility, let's give it a 7 or an 8, because there are existing frameworks, the Berliner Insurability Framework, that really structure the analysis, makes it very easy for the student. I would say in terms of academic importance, the problem is you kind of limit your scope in making the question more practical and interesting by focusing on just ransomware. You limit the scope.
Very interesting. So how do we quantify this? Would you agree if we give it academic relevance of, say, 5 and an industry relevance also of 5 to 6?
Yeah, that sounds fair.
The second topic that we have is analysis of cyber insurance policies and all the related forms that are usually filled out by risk owners seeking cyber insurance. Romanowski et al. Basically looked at 5 different categories. For example, what security questions are carriers looking for when they underwrite cyber? What is the coverage that is offered by each of these carriers? We have with the SURF filing system one of the, I guess, most valuable tools to really get into the current market situation of cyber insurance. Now, the SURF filing system, and we will have another video on that, allows every interested party to look at the cyber insurance policies of, I think, 45 US states. You yourself have done extensive research in, I think, 2 of your papers. Do you think that 3 months, the usual time frame in a bachelor thesis, is enough to do meaningful work on the content analysis of cyber insurance policies?
Yeah, so I did a short summer project. It was about 2.5 months where I looked at application forms. So these are the forms that insureds have to fill out before they can purchase insurance. And they were reasonably easy to collect. I could just Google for cyber insurance application form using a variety of search terms and quickly built a corpus of about 25. Then in terms of the actual content analysis, you need to kind of process that data and put it into a structured format, maybe breaking down the questions into a spreadsheet. And then the next question in a content analysis is, do you want it to be inductive or deductive? And that means, do you have this kind of pre-existing way of analyzing it, or are you just trying to explore?
So for novice in general to academia, do you think then that the constraints of a usual bachelor thesis might be a little bit too hard to, advertise it as feasible for a bachelor student?
Yeah, so I guess going through data collection, data analysis, it could be difficult in a 3-month time frame. True.
Mm-hmm. And then for the master student, however, who has already done his bachelor degrees and who has double the amount of time, it, however, gets feasible again.
Yeah, it could be the case. But I also think if you go in with a very structured methodology, that can help things because you're not trying to explore and work out which methodology to apply. So for instance, in my project, we tried to map the questions in the application form to an existing cybersecurity framework. Mm-hmm. So this took maybe 2 weeks of analysis, just taking a question and saying which section of this cybersecurity framework does it fall under. So that's quite a closed task. And I think, when you're looking at a bachelor's thesis, these closed, more certain tasks and projects are better for the reasons you described.
Maybe give it a 6 for bachelor students and like a 7 for master?
For a deductive analysis with the kind of pre-planned analysis framework, sure, 6 or 7.
Mm-hmm. And then the relevance for academia and industry. So I think it's super relevant for the industry, of course, basically just making sure that your competitors or your competitors are putting out there. But also for academia, so the Romanowski paper now is a little bit outdated. The sample size or the sample they used went from 2009 to 2016. So of course in the last 5 years we have seen tremendous advancements in cyber insurance, not only in the size of premiums, but also the evolution of wordings, exclusions and so on. So would you agree with me when I say the industry relevance is a 9 to 10? Well, for academia, it is, I guess, also an 8 to 9?
Yeah, again, I'd say it depends on the question, but I think it's fair to say that these application forms and policies will change over time, so it will always be somewhat relevant to academia and always relevant to industry because they're continually trying to improve these things.
Mm-hmm. So now we come to the third topic that we have, and this is basically the overlap between cyber insurance and other insurance types. Now, the usual insurance types you hear here are errors and omissions, D&O insurance, tech insurance, and general liability. The question becomes now, okay, I have a big multinational company and I have, let's say, all these standard insurance forms. Especially brokers are looking, of course, to offer their clients like a complete gap-free coverage for their most pressing risks. So basically this team complex looks at the different way how insurance are written, maybe even like a national comparison, how cyber, for example, differs, which is underwritten in Germany versus one that is underwritten in the US. So yeah, Daniel, you nor I don't really have, like, let's say, first-hand experience with this topic in an academic sense, right?
Yeah, so I mean, this is where the many disciplines that touch on cyber insurance come in. Very legal topics I've tried to stay away from because, yeah, I just don't have the expertise. But I think there's some really interesting anecdotes I've heard in this space. So one thing I have heard, this was in the early days of cyber insurance, which is often the policies would be created in the US with references to the US legal system, for instance, the definitions of personal data. And then those definitions would be sold in Europe when they're trying to create a new product. And these are just anecdotes I've heard. I've never heard anyone analyze that formally, but it would be interesting to see if those kind of quirks where policy references to one legal system are emerging in another are more widespread.
So I think in the name of intellectual honesty, we will refrain from giving a feasibility benchmark here. But however, on the other side, I think we can still say that this has, of course, extremely high relevance for the industry sector, probably even scoring out of 10. And I guess also for academia, it is very important. So yeah, I guess I would score it an 8 for the academia side. Would you agree with these ratings?
Yeah, so I think for industry, it's especially valuable because businesses are always looking to move into new markets. So to understand how things might be different in, say, an Asian country could be very valuable.
Okay, let's come to the fourth topic. And this is game theoretical, usually economic ways to look at cyber insurance. Now, this is also a mainstay of the, let's say, early cyber insurance literature. There were many papers on this in the 2000s, for example. So, for example, one question is if a cyber insurer is not able to continuously monitor the cybersecurity level of a party he has insured, this will likely make a cyber insurance market in the game theoretical economic sense impossible. Are these adequate topics for bachelor or master theses?
It is reasonably feasible because often these game theory models are just applying solution concepts that have already been worked out. So they choose a game and then apply that game to cyber insurance. So they try to justify how does this model describe the cyber insurance market. And that's where I think it becomes more difficult because these game theory models are often simplistic. So the difficult case is saying, why does this apply to cyber insurance? I would say it's difficult to convince people that a game theory model describes reality. And it's, yeah, I don't want to say it's easy because of course it takes work and you need to be rigorous and not make mistakes. But proving the internal consistency of a game theory model is a solved problem.
So in terms of rating, I guess then we say if you find a good game theoretical setup that allows you to examine an interesting angle, then I guess we can give it a 6. However, the topics itself should not be that abundant. You've touched on the simplicity, so probably also the relevance for the industry is quite low, and as well the relevance for the future academic research.
Yeah, so I would say I agree with you. The relevance for industry is probably low, but maybe with the right game theoretic model, you could find something convincing with actionable insights. But I think for academia, In a sense, because the current models are so simplistic and often they don't well reflect what actually goes on in the market, it actually creates a lot of opportunity for people to come in and say, well, there's been this empirical research and it shows that the market is like this, therefore a better model to describe reality is this. And that kind of sequential growth is, I think, suited well to, it's easy to sell that to academia.
Let's give it a rating for the feasibility as a bachelor thesis topic of 6, a master thesis topic of 5, and the relevance for the industry of maybe a 3. And for academia, again, if you find an interesting topic, also give it a 5. Topic number 5 is the underwriting process itself. Now, we have touched upon this already when we talked about the content analysis. But how cyber is underwritten? What are actually the requirements for a risk owner, a firm or an individual to get cyber insurance has of course huge implications for the markup of cyber insurance portfolios. The main question here at this topic is how feasible is it for a bachelor or master thesis? Because it seems to be quite a vast topic, which is, and I guess I can spoiler this already, of course, highly relevant for the industry as well as for academic circles. So what considerations should a bachelor or master student take when they try to decide if they want to write on the underwriting process, Daniel?
Yes, I think there's 2 things here. One is to ask what underwriting processes exist currently. If you go to the SURF filing system, the answers are there. The underwriters are required to file with the regulator how they price insurance. What I think is more challenging is to ask, what is a better way to price? What data sources can we bring in? Which statistical techniques can we use to really shed light on the actuarial problem? So I would say the descriptive question is very feasible. And the second question I would say is relatively infeasible.
So then the score, I guess, is industry relevance in general. Again, the second part that Daniel mentioned is of course more relevant. I still give it a 10. For the academia, it's also super interesting. In terms of feasibility, for the descriptive part, I give it an 8 for the bachelor thesis. And the master thesis is also interesting, but I would say you have more time. So if it's just descriptive, it might be slightly too simplistic for master thesis. Therefore, I just give it a 7.
So number 6, Daniel has asked me to introduce because I have very recently worked on a project related to this, and this is post-breach services. So one aspect of cyber insurance is that not only does it cover the costs and the consequences of cyber incidents, it often indemnifies the services of firms who go in to help the victim firm. And there really is very little known about this. So we know that forensics providers go in to help. We have a vague idea that lawyers help advise on the notification requirements. There are also firms who help with the notifications. But what we don't really know is how this network of firms work out, how people are contracted. So yeah, there's many open questions in this space. So the main way to kind of investigate this ecosystem and this aspect of cyber insurance is to speak to people in the ecosystem. And the problem there is getting people's time, because these are professionals who earn hundreds, if not thousands of dollars per hour. And then the question is, how does one master's or bachelor's student get their time? And I think that is the major barrier to overcome there.
If this prerequisite could be a feasible topic for a bachelor or master student?
Yeah, for sure. So if you can overcome the barrier of recruitment, either you have a parent in the ecosystem or you yourself have worked in the ecosystem, then I think it's a feasible topic, yes. But the big feasibility problem to overcome is recruitment.
I see. So in terms of quantitatively, how would you rank the feasibility?
I would say 3 or 4, because it really is difficult to recruit people.
Okay, and for completion's sake, the industry relevance is a 9 or 10?
Well, given I've just done a project on this topic, I think I have to give it a 10 for both.
Topic number 7 is the cybercrime value chain. The darknet, for example, offers exceedingly ransomware as a service, where even tech not affined people can find customized, maybe even bespoke solution to ransom and attack a specific organization. So basically the barrier of entry into the hacking game, and especially the ransomware extortion game, is not that high in technical terms anymore. So the question now is this a feasible topic for bachelor master students? And I would say very likely it is not. The problem here is to really look at this in a scientific way. You need some kind of qualitative or quantitative data. What are your thoughts on this, Daniel?
So I think in terms of the feasibility of this topic, collecting data, empirical data, is difficult because not only is it time consuming, but there are ethical issues studying criminals. One way to get around this, which I don't think will work for a bachelor's student, but could work for a master's student, is the Cybercrime Centre at the University of Cambridge is actually set up with this mandate to collect data for other researchers. So if you get in contact with those guys, I think there's a form you have to sign to say, yeah, I won't do X and Y with the data, but they could make the data they collect available for the master's student to conduct the project. And that, I think, is more feasible and could be a stunning research project because those guys really collect data at scale in a load of interesting things. So I'd encourage you to read about that.
Very interesting. Okay, so with this hint, I would say the feasibility for a bachelor student is maybe a 3. Again, the constraints are just too high. But as Danny mentioned, for master students, if you get in touch with them and have access to the data set and maybe, get even additional sources, it seems to be a quite interesting topic. So I'm ranking it for master students even as high as an 8, given that you have access to the Cambridge data. The relevance for industry and academia, I give it a 10 for the industry because, after all, this is basically the producer of the underlying for the whole cyber risk game. And in academia, of course, while, as Daniel mentioned, the insights are sparse, and therefore also, of course, the marginal utility gained by having these insights is high. So I also give it, a 10 for academia. The 8th topic that we have is the welfare effects of cyber. Now, this is a very important topic in cyber risk research. So without spoiling anything, I already give it a 10 in the academic relevance, and this is probably at least an 8 for the industry relevance. Now the great thing is that Daniel Woods is here with us, and as you can see from the references at the screen, like 3 of his papers are basically in this exact direction. Now welfare effects of cyber are, on the one hand, of course, the general effect that you have on purchasing insurance. A risk-averse individual will gain utility by smoothing his consumption. On top of this general insurance utility increasing effect, we also have several effects that go on in addition at cyber. One of the most important facts of cyber incidents is that the damages are usually not just internalized by the affected party, but they're usually spread around. So Daniel, what do you think in terms of feasibility for a bachelor or master student to write a thesis under this theme complex?
Honestly, I think it's a difficult question to answer because the effects are so diffuse. You're looking at this from the kind of view of a social planner, and there's so many tiny aspects that you're trying to aggregate and say the sum of these smaller aspects is overall net positive or net negative. So I think ultimately the feasibility is low.
Let's give it a 3 for the bachelor student and maybe a 4 for the master student who has at least, on paper, a little bit higher opportunity to write a meaningful thesis in this topic. Topic number 9 is regulation. Now, this of course ties into the discussion we just had on welfare. In economics, a social planner is a benevolent entity that makes sure that the welfare within its system is maximized. So regulation is usually the go-to policy device that it can use to achieve these goals. So on the one hand, regulation now has a strong link to the welfare topic we just discussed. On the other hand, of course, it's a very strong law topic, which also goes down to the wordings of cyber insurance policies and the general coverage that is offered. So here again, I guess we should split it up in the economic sense and discuss it in that way. And on the other hand, look at the law topics. As we have mentioned, neither Daniel or I are really too deep into the law topics, so I guess cannot really rate them. However, in the economic sense, I would say that it's of course relevant for the industry because they, after all, have to follow the regulation in a given jurisdiction. For academia, this is also interesting, again, from the economic lens. It ties in, as mentioned, it's very strongly linked to the welfare debate. In terms of feasibility for a bachelor or master student, what do you think, Daniel, the economic part? Is it basically the same answer as for the welfare you just gave, or is there maybe more to it?
Yeah, if anything, this is a more difficult question to answer because not only are you asking what are the incentives and how do they impact social outcomes, security outcomes, you're then asking how can a central planner intervene to shape those outcomes? And I think if there's anything that economics should tell us, it's that actions have unintended consequences and it's often difficult to anticipate what those will be. Yeah, the only caveat I would have is we don't have a dimension for this, but policymakers are incredibly interested in this exact decision. So I saw recently the New York State insurance regulator brought out some guidance for cyber insurance companies. I know the US Senate is talking about it. ENISA, the European Union organization, have spoken about it. So if you could nail this topic, it would be very interesting to policymakers.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Okay, so under the right circumstances is a super rewarding and interesting topic. However, getting those circumstances before your bachelor and master degree is, well, it's at least a challenge and probably rather unlikely. So when we gave a 4 and 3 for welfare, I guess we have to go down to a 2 for the bachelor student and probably also a 2 for the master student here. And topic number 10 is also of very high interest of the industry, and that topic is silent cyber. Now, silent cyber describes cyber damages which occur and are covered not under a so-called affirmative cyber policy, so like an insurance contract which only covers cyber damages, but by, let's say, more traditional lines of insurance. So, for example, if a hacker goes into a steel mill and changes the temperature of a furnace and causes a fire of that, very likely this fire will still be covered by an old property or liability insurance policy. There has been one very important policy change at Lloyd's in London, the most important insurance market in the world. Now they, I think, mandated, starting from 2020, that all property policies that are sold at Lloyd's have to clearly state if they cover cyber damages or not. And from 2021 onwards, this also applies to third-party liability claims. Relevance for the industry is, as mentioned, extremely high, and this is also very interesting in academia. However, there's very little research being done here. Daniel, do you think that the very small body of literature in academia makes it very hard for a bachelor or master student to write his topic in this theme?
To me, the difficult thing is silent cyber is kind of necessarily unobservable in a sense because it exists all among all the policies that aren't cyber insurance. So that creates immediate feasibility concerns from my perspective. And perhaps you would have to scope down significantly and look at what is silent cyber exposure in marine policies.
Then in terms of feasibility, I definitely agree. I would also give it a 2 for the bachelor student and also a 2 for the master student. If, as Daniel mentioned, you can scope it down, really nail down your topic and make sure that you have the right sources before you start your thesis, then it's a good topic and it's, of course, as seen and discussed, a very important topic for the industry and academia. However, this is more, I guess, the scope of a PhD or maybe even just a whole chair at a university just doing silent cyber. The 11th topic is behavioral issues in cyber insurance. So we know, for example, anecdotally speaking, that the awareness of cyber insurance goes up when a company is hit by a cyber incident or somebody in its immediate peer circle is hit by a cyber attack. Behavioral topics, of course, come on the one hand from psychology. They touch upon behavioral economics, which, for example, studies how to frame a certain decision, be it now, for example, to insure yourself against cyber risk, and which arguments the risk owner wants to hear. There has been an EU-sponsored project, the Cybeco project, which we, of course, have linked as all other references, and which basically looked at these questions from multiple angles. I think they are about to publish their results now in the middle of 2021, and if you decide to do a bachelor or master thesis, they seem to be the natural first step and natural literature to read first. In terms of relevance for the industry, I'm definitely giving this a 10 because, again, it's basically the whole point of selling insurance. Now, for academia itself, behavioral topics are, of course, also interesting, not as high as a 10. I'm giving it a 7. Now, in terms of feasibility, Daniel, do you think that this is a good topic for a bachelor or master student?
So one issue we have is that cyber insurance is bought by organizations, not individuals. So then you get the problem of do you apply psychology theories about how individuals make decisions or organizational theory? Where I think it could become more feasible is more recently we've seen basically privacy insurance policies introduced for individuals. There it becomes much more feasible because we all interact with every day potential consumers of this kind of cyber insurance.
So I guess in terms of feasibility, we give it 4 for the bachelor student and I guess a 6 for a master student. If you, for example, can make an empirical experiment, for example, phrasing cyber insurance policies different to students playing a game, then this also could be a very interesting source of raw data to analyze. And I think also the Cybeco project did a similar thing within its scope. Now, the 12th and 13th topic are both quantitative in nature, opposed to the more or less qualitative topics that we have discussed so far. Now, in terms of feasibility, the most important thing, if you want to write a quantitative paper or a quantitative bachelor or master thesis about cyber risk, is to have the data set already in the first place. Given that prerequisite, the 12th topic that we have is the modeling of cyber insurance contracts, be it in terms of pricing, be it in terms of distribution, or be it just the cyber loss distribution itself. Now, Daniel, you have done a paper on this called the Cyber County Loss Distribution. Could you give us a brief breakdown of the methodology that you used and what questions you wanted to answer?
Yeah, so we flipped the conventional insurance problem, which is how do we derive prices from data? And what we instead said was, how do we derive loss data from prices? And the way we did that was with a computational approach where we assumed a loss distribution and we said which parameters would explain these prices that we see. And this is a problem unique to cyber insurance because in most lines of insurance, they have hundreds of years of data and actually coming up with prices is quite tricky. Whereas in cyber insurance, we have this weird situation where because of the SURF filing system, there's very many prices, but there's actually comparatively few loss data.
Very interesting. So basically, this is a top-down approach. You're basically coming from the finished product, the cyber insurance policy, and you're going down and basically going back to the damages, or at least what the sentiment of the respective insurer is towards this loss distribution. The interesting part about Daniel's paper is that the model distributions of the insurers, or to be more precise, I think it's like the average out of 26 or 27 insurers, are available in the paper. This is, of course, one way to do it, basically reverse engineering from insurance prices and taking those distributions as the underlying. The other straightforward approach, I would assume, is to take a data set which consists of cyber damages, or even better of cyber claims. So you know that they are, I guess, more systemized because often when you have, for example, a breach in 2017 leaked 2 million records, you don't know or you can't directly associate it with a dollar loss unless, of course, there has been regulatory fines or other kind of information. In terms of relevance for industry, I'm definitely giving this a 10 because I guess cyber risk modeling itself is at the heart of the whole industry. In terms for academia, the general lack of data is, of course, a huge problem for everybody in the cyber risk game, industry as well as academia. So to have more distributions or just, let's say, educated guesses is a huge boon for the academia. So I'm also giving it a 10. In terms of feasibility, Daniel, do you think this is a suited topic for a bachelor or master student?
Yes, I think it could be if the student focused on first collecting the prices in a very focused way and then applying a known algorithm. So for instance, if you reached out to me, I could share my analysis code. That could be a painful experience reading through it, but I'm happy to share it. So that's the kind of thing that I think makes it more feasible for a bachelor's student. If you use techniques that other people have already developed and you are really just bringing new data to the table.
And for a master's student?
Yeah, again, it just becomes even more feasible. So you could use new algorithms, new loss distributions, bring in new data. Those are the kind of innovations I think a master's student could implement.
Okay, very well. So in terms of feasibility, I'm giving it a 5 for a bachelor student and a 7 for the master's student. The 13th topic is the modeling of higher cyber risk transfers. Now, this also includes modeling the damages of an industry sector, for example, all financial institutions in Germany, the cyber damages of a whole economy, for example, all cyber damages in France, or even the holy grail of cyber risk research, which is a model that allows us to model the worldwide cyber damages. Now, the same logic that we just talked about when modeling cyber damages, of course, also applies to higher cyber risk transfers. Now, Daniel, I know that the title of your PhD was The Economics of Cyber Risk Transfer, and you have also discussed higher risk cyber transfers. I guess it's a little bit biased, but first of all, what do you think about the relevance of these questions for academia and the industry?
Yeah, so I think to the industry, it's certainly important. As cyber insurers sell more insurance, they become both more concerned by the higher moments of the distribution and also how they can transfer that risk to reinsurers, and then reinsurers are beginning to consider how can it be transferred to the capital markets. So I think certainly interesting.
I also have first-hand experience with this because I have written my master thesis exactly in this topical area. In my master thesis, I looked at the feasibility of so-called cyber bonds. I took the cyber damage distributions provided by the cyber risk calculator of the RAND Corporation. So in terms of feasibility, as I've written my master thesis about this, I would give it an 8. Now for bachelor students, it gets, I guess, way more tricky here because you not only have to look into cyber loss data in the first place, but you also have to bound them together with some kind of cohesive stochastic measure and then also do some kind of analysis on them. So while I give it an 8 for a master's student in an economic or mathematical field, I give it a 3 for the feasibility of a bachelor student. These are the 13 topics that we have so far on this list. Do not forget that it is an organic list. So if you have either done a thesis in this area already, or if there are other topics of interest that you might want to see somebody do their bachelor master thesis in, please let us know. You can reach Daniel and myself on LinkedIn, or you can use the contact formula on cybereconomics.com. So thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing your experience and your knowledge with us today. And I think this is extremely valuable advice for everybody who wants to get into cyber risk qualification or cyber risk insurance in general.
Yeah, thank you. I've been researching this for now 5 years, and it's great to kind of share my experiences. And also sorry to the viewers that slowly but surely it's got darker, and I have looked more and more like a kind of hacker in some kind of Netflix series, which I can assure you my life is much more boring.